Hey everybody, hope you're all doing alright out there. Today I want to talk about the difference between starting an EFI, electric fuel injection bike, or a bike with a carburetor, or a carbed bike as we call them, because it's very different. So much so that if you're used to having a fuel injected bike, if you try and start a carb bike in the cold, you might think it's broken, and it's definitely not. I have both types of bikes here today. I'm going to start both of them from complete cold, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And you might also learn a few things if you're a bit new to this. So, electronic fuel injection basically delivers fuel directly into the pistons or the manifold, depending on the type of application that it is. But a computer electronically uses little pumps, we're going to call them, to just spurt little bits of fuel in as needed. This obviously increases with revs. It can be tuned for the amount of fuel that comes out in each squirt, so you can really adapt the map, which is, how much fuel and air, basically, an engine's getting at any given point. If an engine's running lean, that means it's got lots of air and not much fuel. That will make it powerful, but very hot. If it runs rich, that means lots more petrol. It will run a bit more sluggishly, it will smell like fuel, and it will cake up and it won't get as much power, but it will run cooler. A carburetor, on the other hand, is like a magic box, which air goes through and petrol is sucked into it, which atomizes, and it increases that with the amount of airflow that it needs. That's a very simplified version. If you want to know exactly how a carburetor works, Smarter Everyday's video is the best one I've ever seen on physically showing how they work. This is the EFI bike. EFI bikes are easy to start because they've got a computer in them. They have an automatic choke. Choke just basically means adding extra fuel at the starting point to make it richer to help the bike start up. As it warms, it will lean that off, as in turn down the fuel. They can do this through a simple sort of pre-programmed thing, so it just runs through it and that should be right. But they also have things like O2 sensors on them that are in the exhaust that can pick up the amount of unburnt fuel and adjust as it requires it. So, let's have a look with the EFI first. This is the easy one. Another thing about EFI bikes is they have fuel pumps. Carburetors don't, they work through gravity. So when we turn on this bike with EFI, we're going to hear the fuel pump start up. If you don't hear this on an EFI bike and it's not starting, that could be your issue. So if you listen, it's going to be a whine. Hopefully you heard that, we'll try again. And every time you click this, it'll do it. So to start this bike, I am simply going to press the start button and nothing else. So one finger. Walking a little bit away so you can actually hear what I'm saying, you'll notice that it started out around 2000 RPM. That will slowly drop as the bike warms up and removes the extra fuel it's putting through the system. At this point in time, it can smell quite fuel-y if you have an open exhaust. Right, you should be able to hear now, it's slowing down. The revs are slowly, progressively getting slower and slower as the temperature's coming up. We're getting closer to 1000 RPM, and if I'd left this long enough, I'm not going to, it would get down to 1000 RPM if I left this long enough, but there's no point getting this bike up to heat when I'm not about to go and use it. So that's EFI. It's super easy. You press a button and it starts. You won't need to touch the throttle in most cases, or generally at all. Some systems, like Suzuki's, have this thing called one start, where you just press it once and let go and it will keep going until it starts. With this, if it didn't start immediately, you'd have to keep pressing the button. So the EFI bike was a Yamaha XJ6 Diversion S 2010. This is my 2008 DRZ 400 SM. It's actually a 440. It's had lots of work done to it, and I have an entire series taking this from a rust heap, breaking it all the way down to a frame, completely taking the paint off, repainting it and building the bike back up. It's a whole series. I've also got a series on other bikes like that. Well, not quite as in depth, but the XJ6 has had its own series. As well as check out my playlists like workshop videos and mechanical explanations. Anyway, so this is a carbureted bike. The carb is in here, and it basically has a bowl of fuel at the bottom of it, a hole through it, and the throttle puts more fuel through it. It also has a thing called a choke, which is a little lever that when you pull it out, it adds more fuel in, like the electronic injection one does on its own. Okay, this is the choke. It normally has this sort of symbol on it. That's all the way out, half in, fully in. So that's off, slightly on, and fully on. With this bike, when it's summer, I don't have to use the choke to start it. It will start no problem. In winter, I absolutely do. And I think this is why people think that carb bikes have more character, is because you have to get to know them and know how to make them work. Okay, so in this current situation, with the choke fully in, I'm not going to touch the throttle, I'm just going to press the start button. This bike won't start. it is not going to start. So I have to put the choke on by pulling it out. Now when I try and start it, but as you can tell now, it's revving really high, and it's revving really high for the exact same reason the other one was. It's putting more fuel through. If we knock it down a step, it brings it down, and if I close it, it'll die. All right, if I twist the throttle at this point, it'll die. If this bike doesn't warm up, it's unrideable. It hates it. It does not work. Now I know there's a lot of arguments about whether you need to warm a bike up or not, and how you should do that. You shouldn't start a bike and start revving it. That's a known. With some bikes, like EFI bikes, there isn't necessarily a problem with starting the bike and just riding off, and just don't try and gun it to start with. Just gradually go until you get a temperature on the dash. With bikes like this, you have to sit, leave them to warm up before you go anywhere. So now at this point, with the choke in, I can probably get it to start on the button, but it won't keep running, I doubt. Derek, you never play game, and now you're playing game too well. What the hell? So if you try and start a carb bike and it won't just start on its own, or it just dies immediately, choke out, get it started. Sometimes a little bit of throttle helps. Now, I'm going to leave that running for a minute, and as it warms up, we're going to hear a tonal difference of the way that it's running. In a minute. You can hear it almost sounds like it's missing occasionally. Okay, there. Right now, that's too rich. That's way too rich. See now, too rich, can't run. But now when we start it, a little bit of throttle. Now it will sit there and happily run. You can still kill it like this though. So if someone has an EFI bike and comes along to something like this and tries to start it without the choke, it's not going to work most likely if it's cold. And if they try and use extra throttle to make it start, they're just going to end up flooding it. Flooding is basically when too much unburnt fuel gets into the, fills the carb up, can even get into the cylinder, and your stoichiometry, which is your mixture of fuel and air, and depending on where that is, makes it more powerful as an explosion. Remember what I was saying earlier on about too much fuel and it runs cold, too much air and it runs hot? That's because the point that petrol explodes the best is when it's very lean. That gives you more of a very fast woof. If you have lots and lots of fuel, it's more of a vroom, in simple terms. But yeah, so if you find yourself in a scenario where you need to start a carb bike and it seems like it's broken, it's not, most likely, or it might be if it's old, in which case, yeah. But anyway, make sure you got the choke on. Don't go wanging on the throttle too much, and it should come to life. And when it does come to life, as I say, it's not like the EFI bike, which just once it's started, it's going to sort itself out. You kind of have to tend it. You have to listen to it, know it, let it warm a bit, reduce the choke on it, and then make sure it's warm enough to ride before you get going. As I say, I think this is the reason people think that bikes like this have more character or more soul, because you really do have to know it. And if you've had a bike for a long time, you get to know every single little fault and little bit and piece that you have to know to ride it, to the point that someone might not be able to actually ride your bike and you have to come along and go, oh, no, you have to do this, this and this. It happens with old bikes, and it's when you have a true relationship with your bike. It's not anti-theft, but it's getting close. If you found this video interesting or useful, smack that like button. If you want to help support this channel, please consider doing that through Patreon. Links in the description, and I could really do with your help. Yeah, I'm just going to put it like that. I could really do with your help. I'm investing a lot in the channel. I've got lots of plans for this year, but times are getting tougher and tougher, as we all know. And being a creator is, it's a little more tricky than it used to be. But I love doing this so much and connecting with you guys that I'm not about to stop. Anyway, until the next one, bye-bye.